The General's black sedan pulled into our cracked driveway at exactly 3:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. I watched from behind the faded curtains as a man in full-dress uniform stepped out, medals catching the afternoon sun. My mother was in the kitchen, probably preparing another lecture about how I was wasting my life. She had no idea that in 5 minutes, everything she thought she knew about her daughter would shatter. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and for 26 years, I lived under the weight of my mother's disappointment. Carmen Martinez had immigrated from El Salvador with nothing but dreams and determination, working 3 jobs to put herself through nursing school. She expected the same relentless ambition from me. Instead, she got a daughter who dropped out of college twice, bounced between minimum wage jobs, and spent her weekends hiking alone in the mountains of Colorado. "Ninja, you're 26 and what do you have to show for it?" she'd say, washing dishes with more force than necessary. "Your cousin Sophia is already a doctor. Your neighbor's daughter just bought her second house. And you? You can't even hold down a job at the grocery store." The grocery store incident still stung. I'd been working at Henderson's Market for 8 months when I noticed the assistant manager, Dale Hoffman, had been shortchanging elderly customers who paid in cash. Small amounts, $5 here, $10 there, but it added up. When I reported it to the corporate, Dale spun a story about my attitude problems and frequent absences. I was fired the next day. My mother didn't want to hear my side. "There's always an excuse with you, Rebecca, always someone else's fault." So I moved back home to our cramped duplex on Maple Street in Denver, sleeping in my childhood bedroom with its peeling unicorn wallpaper. The lectures came daily. How I was a burden. How I needed to grow up. How she couldn't support me forever. I tried explaining that I was looking for work, that I'd submitted dozens of applications. But Carmen Martinez had run out of patience with her youngest daughter's explanations. The only escape I found was in the mountains. Every weekend, I'd pack my worn hiking boots and drive my beat-up Honda to different trailheads around Colorado. Red Rocks, Mount Evans, the Flatirons near Boulder. Anywhere I could lose myself in the rhythm of walking and the silence of wilderness. It was on these hikes that I started noticing things. Trails that were poorly marked. Hikers who were unprepared for sudden weather changes. Search and rescue teams that seemed overwhelmed during busy seasons. I began carrying extra water, basic first aid supplies, and a GPS device that I'd bought with my last paycheck from Henderson's Market. The first time I helped someone was in March, near Golden Gate Canyon State Park. An older man named Walter had twisted his ankle badly on a rocky section of trail. His wife, Patricia, was panicking because they had no cell service and the sun was setting. I helped Walter stabilize his ankle with medical tape from my pack, then guided them both down the mountain using my GPS to find the shortest route back to their car. "You saved us," Patricia said, tears in her eyes. "We could have been stuck out there all night." I didn't think much of it. It seemed like basic human decency. But word started spreading in the hiking community. Other hikers began recognizing me on popular trails. They'd wave and share stories about friends I'd helped. A woman named Jennifer, whose daughter I'd found when she wandered off the trail near Bear Lake. A group of college students from Boulder, who I'd guided to safety when they got caught in an unexpected snowstorm on Mount Elbert. My mother remained unimpressed. "Playing around in the mountains doesn't pay bills, Rebecca. When are you going to get serious about your life?" I'd tried to get serious. After the grocery store, I applied for office jobs, retail positions, restaurant work. Anything that would prove to my mother that I wasn't the failure she believed I was. But employers weren't interested in someone with my spotty work history. The rejections piled up like unpaid bills. By June, our relationship had deteriorated to the point where we barely spoke. My mother would come home from her shift at Denver General Hospital, tired and frustrated, and the sight of me on the couch with job search websites open on my laptop would trigger another argument. "Look at your brother Miguel," she'd say. "He's got 3 kids and 2 businesses. He doesn't live with his mother, he contributes to the world." Miguel was the golden child, married at 22, kids by 25, owner of a successful landscaping company by 30, Everything I wasn't. Maybe I should just move out, I said during one particularly heated exchange in July. With what money? My mother shot back. You can't even afford your phone bill. She was right, which made it worse. I'd been living off my savings from the grocery store job, and those were nearly gone. I felt trapped between my mother's disappointment and my own inability to find stable employment. The breaking point came on a sweltering Thursday in late July. I'd spent the morning applying for jobs online and had received 2 more rejection emails. My mother found me in the kitchen, staring at my laptop screen. "Another rejection?" she asked, not unkindly, but with a weariness that cut deeper than anger. I nodded. "Rebecca, I love you, but I can't do this anymore. You're 26 years old, and you're a burden I can't afford to carry. I need you to find somewhere else to live by the end of the month." The words hit like a physical blow. Burden. The word she'd danced around for months but never said directly. "Mom, I'm trying." Trying isn't enough anymore. That weekend, I drove to Rocky Mountain National Park, planning to camp overnight and figure out my next move. I had enough money for maybe 2 months of rent if I could find a cheap room somewhere. After that, I had no idea. I was hiking alone on the Longs Peak Trail when I heard shouting in the distance, emergency calls echoing off the granite walls. Something was wrong. The voices were coming from below the tree line, where the trail curved around a massive boulder formation. I quickened my pace, my hiking boots finding purchase on the loose scree. As I rounded the bend, I saw them, 4 figures in military fatigues clustered around a 5th person lying motionless on the ground. "Over here!" I called out, scrambling down the rocky slope toward them. The soldier nearest to me looked up. He was young, maybe early 20s, with sergeant stripes on his sleeve and panic in his eyes. "Thank God. Are you a medic?" "No, but I have first aid training." It wasn't entirely true. I'd taken a basic course years ago and picked up more from YouTube videos and wilderness safety blogs. But these soldiers looked desperate. The injured soldier was a woman, probably in her 30s, unconscious with blood seeping through her fatigues near her left shoulder. Her breathing was shallow but steady. "What happened?" I asked, dropping my pack and pulling out my first aid supplies. "Training exercise went wrong," said another soldier, this one with corporal stripes. His name tape read Jackson. Lieutenant Torres was rappelling down that cliff face when her anchor point failed. She fell about 30 feet onto these rocks. I could see the problem immediately. Torres had a deep laceration on her shoulder that was bleeding heavily, and from the way her left arm was positioned, likely a dislocated shoulder or broken collarbone. But what worried me more was the head injury. There was swelling near her left temple and dried blood in her hair. "How long has she been unconscious?" I asked, carefully examining the shoulder wound. "About 20 minutes, said the sergeant. His name tape read Williams. "We called for emergency evac, but the helicopter can't get in here because of the wind conditions. They said it could be hours before they can attempt a rescue." Hours. I looked at Torres's pale face and knew she didn't have hours. The head injury combined with potential internal bleeding meant she needed immediate medical attention. "We need to get her down to the main trailhead," I said, applying pressure to the shoulder wound with gauze from my pack. "There's a ranger station there with better radio communication, and an ambulance can actually reach it." "That's over 4 miles, said Jackson, "through rough terrain. We can't carry her that far." "Yes, we can," I said firmly, "but we need to do it right." I'd never attempted anything like this before, but I'd seen enough search and rescue operations during my hiking to understand the basics. The key was stabilizing Torres for transport while moving as quickly as possible. "I need you to tear your shirts into strips," I told the soldiers. "We're going to make an improvised stretcher using tree branches and your gear." While they worked, I continued treating Torres's injuries. I cleaned and bandaged the shoulder wound, then used my hiking poles and rope to create a makeshift splint for her arm. The head injury was the wild card. I couldn't do much except monitor her vital signs and pray. "Ma'am, I'm Staff Sergeant Davis," said the 4th soldier who had been quiet until now. He was older than the others, maybe 40, with the weathered look of someone who'd seen combat. "I've got to ask, why are you helping us?" Most civilians would just wait for professional rescue. It was a fair question. I thought about my mother's words from Thursday, burden. About the rejection letters piling up in my email. About sleeping in a bedroom with unicorn wallpaper at 26 years old. Because you need help, I said simply. And I can provide it. We fashioned a stretcher from 2 sturdy pine branches, torn fabric and military webbing from their packs. It wasn't pretty, but it would hold together long enough to get Torres down the mountain. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. The descent was brutal. The trail wasn't designed for carrying an unconscious person, and every few hundred yards we had to stop to navigate around fallen trees or rocky obstacles. I took point, using my GPS and knowledge of the terrain to find the safest route down. Torres regained consciousness about halfway to the trailhead. Her first words were a string of curse words that would have impressed a sailor. "Easy, Lieutenant," Davis said. "You took a bad fall, but we're getting you out of here." "Who's the civilian?" Torres asked weakly, her eyes focusing on me. "Rebecca Martinez," I said. "Just keep still. We're almost to the ranger station." "Martinez, you're the one who's been helping hikers around here. I've heard about you." I was surprised. "You have?" "My buddy Craig Peterson. You helped him and his girlfriend when they got lost near Estes Park last month. He said you were like some kind of mountain guardian angel." I remembered Craig, a young soldier from Fort Carson who'd taken a wrong trail and ended up miles off course with his girlfriend Sarah. I'd found them after dark, cold and scared, and guided them back to the parking area using my headlamp. "Small world," I said. By the time we reached the ranger station, Torres was alert and talking, which was a good sign for the head injury. The ranger on duty, a woman named Lisa Chen, immediately called for an ambulance and contacted the soldiers' base at Fort Carson. "That was incredible work," Chen told me while we waited for the paramedics. "I've never seen a civilian coordinate a rescue like that." The ambulance arrived within 30 minutes, followed shortly by a military vehicle carrying what appeared to be high-ranking officers. As the paramedics loaded Torres into the ambulance, one of the officers approached me. "Ms. Martinez? I'm Colonel Harper, Fort Carson. I understand you organized Lieutenant Torres's rescue." "These soldiers did most of the work," I said. "I just helped navigate." "That's not what I'm hearing." Colonel Harper looked at Davis, who nodded. "Sergeant Davis tells me you basically ran a field hospital up there, then planned and executed a 4-mile medical evacuation through difficult terrain, with no formal training." "I watch a lot of YouTube," I said weakly. Colonel Harper didn't smile. "Ms. Martinez, would you be willing to come to Fort Carson tomorrow morning? There are some people who'd like to meet you." I thought about my mother's deadline, end of the month, to move out. About the empty bank account and the stack of rejection letters. About being called a burden. "Sure," I said. "I don't have anywhere else to be." The drive home was surreal. I kept replaying the day's events, wondering if I'd somehow imagined the whole thing. But the blood on my hiking shirt and the business card Colonel Harper had given me proved it was real. The descent was brutal. The trail wasn't designed for carrying an unconscious person, and every few hundred yards we had to stop to navigate around fallen trees or rocky obstacles. I took point, using my GPS and knowledge of the terrain to find the safest route down. Torres regained consciousness about halfway to the trailhead. Her first words were a string of curse words that would have impressed a sailor. "Easy, Lieutenant," Davis said. "You took a bad fall, but we're getting you out of here." "Who's the civilian?" Torres asked weakly, her eyes focusing on me. "Rebecca Martinez," I said. "Just keep still. We're almost to the ranger station." "Martinez, you're the one who's been helping hikers around here. I've heard about you." I was surprised. "You have?" "My buddy Craig Peterson. You helped him and his girlfriend when they got lost near Estes Park last month. He said you were like some kind of mountain guardian angel." I remembered Craig, a young soldier from Fort Carson who'd taken a wrong trail and ended up miles off course with his girlfriend Sarah. I'd found them after dark, cold and scared, and guided them back to the parking area using my headlamp. "Small world," I said. By the time we reached the ranger station, Torres was alert and talking, which was a good sign for the head injury. The ranger on duty, A woman named Lisa Chen immediately called for an ambulance and contacted the soldiers' base at Fort Carson. That was incredible work, Chen told me while we waited for the paramedics. I've never seen a civilian coordinate a rescue like that. The ambulance arrived within 30 minutes, followed shortly by a military vehicle carrying what appeared to be high-ranking officers. As the paramedics loaded Torres into the ambulance, one of the officers approached me. "Ms. Martinez? I'm Colonel Harper, Fort Carson. I understand you organized Lieutenant Torres's rescue." "These soldiers did most of the work," I said. "I just helped navigate." "That's not what I'm hearing." Colonel Harper looked at Davis, who nodded. "Sergeant Davis tells me you basically ran a field hospital up there, then planned and executed a 4-mile medical evacuation through difficult terrain, with no formal training." "I watch a lot of YouTube," I said weakly. Colonel Harper didn't smile. "Ms. Martinez, would you be willing to come to Fort Carson tomorrow morning? There are some people who'd like to meet you." I thought about my mother's deadline, end of the month, to move out. About the empty bank account and the stack of rejection letters. About being called a burden. "Sure," I said. "I don't have anywhere else to be." The drive home was surreal. I kept replaying the day's events, wondering if I'd somehow imagined the whole thing. But the blood on my hiking shirt and the business card Colonel Harper had given me proved it was real. Captain Wright leaned forward. "Ms. Martinez, what's your educational background?" The question stung. Here was my life's greatest embarrassment, laid out in a military conference room. I dropped out of college. Twice. First from Colorado State, studying environmental science. Then from community college, where I was trying to finish a general studies degree. "Why did you leave Colorado State?" Dr. Foster asked. The memory was still painful. My advisor told me I wasn't cut out for scientific fieldwork, said I lacked focus and discipline. I was failing organic chemistry and struggling with statistical analysis. I felt like I was proving everyone right about me being a failure. "What about community college?" Money ran out. My mom was working multiple jobs to help pay for it, and I couldn't handle the guilt of watching her sacrifice for something I wasn't even good at. General Nakamura exchanged glances with her colleagues. "Ms. Martinez, I want you to look at this." She slid a photograph across the table. It showed Lieutenant Torres in a hospital bed, very much alive, surrounded by her team members, Williams, Jackson, Davis, and 2 other soldiers I didn't recognize. Lieutenant Torres suffered a severe concussion, dislocated shoulder, and significant blood loss, the general said. "The doctors at Denver Presbyterian told us that without immediate first aid and rapid evacuation, she would have died from her injuries. Your actions saved her life." The weight of those words settled over me. I'd known Torres was hurt badly, but somehow I hadn't fully processed that she might have died without intervention. "But that's not all," Captain Wright continued. "Your improvised stretcher design was textbook military field medicine. Your route selection down the mountain was optimal for casualty evacuation. Your triage of her injuries prioritized the most life-threatening issues first. This wasn't luck, Ms. Martinez. This was training." "I don't have training," I protested. "You have something better," General Nakamura said. "You have instinct. Natural, tactical thinking. The ability to assess, adapt, and execute under extreme pressure. These are qualities we spend years trying to develop in our officers." Dr. Foster looked up from her notes. "Ms. Martinez, have you ever considered military service?" The question caught me completely off guard. No. I'm not exactly military material. I can't even hold down a civilian job. "Why do you think that is?" I thought about the grocery store, about Dale Hoffman and the missing money, about the restaurant job I'd left because the manager was sexually harassing the teenage waitresses, about the office job where I'd been fired for questioning why the company was dumping chemicals behind the building. "I have trouble keeping my mouth shut when I see something wrong," I said finally. "That's called integrity," General Nakamura said. "It's a rare quality." Captain Wright opened his own folder. "Ms. Martinez, I'm going to make you an offer. The Army has a direct commission program for individuals with specialized skills. You could enter as a 2nd lieutenant in our Civil Affairs Division, with a focus on search and rescue operations in mountainous terrain." I stared at him. "You want me to become an officer? I don't even have a college degree." Military experience and demonstrated leadership ability can substitute for formal education in exceptional circumstances, he said. Your actions yesterday, combined with your track record of civilian assistance, qualify as exceptional. My head was spinning. 3 days ago, my mother had called me a burden and told me to move out by month's end. Now the U.S. Army was offering to make me an officer. I need to think about this, I said. Of course, but before you leave, there's someone else who wants to meet you. General Nakamura pressed a button on the conference room phone. Send him in. The door opened, and Staff Sergeant Davis walked in, still wearing his field uniform from yesterday. Behind him came Lieutenant Torres, her left arm in a sling but very much alive. Ms. Martinez, Torres said, her voice stronger than it had been on the mountain. I wanted to thank you personally. The doctors said I lost almost 2 pints of blood up there. Without your field dressing and pressure bandage technique, I would have bled out before reaching the ranger station. Davis stepped forward. Ma'am, I've been in the Army for 18 years. I've served 3 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. I've never seen a civilian take charge of a crisis situation the way you did yesterday. You saved our teammate's life, and you did it without hesitation. Any decent person would have helped, I said. No, Torres said firmly. Any decent person would have called 911 and waited. You assessed, prioritized, organized, and executed a complex medical evacuation through difficult terrain, with no resources except what you carried in a day pack. That's not normal, Ms. Martinez. That's exceptional. General Nakamura stood. I'll give you a week to consider our offer, but I want you to understand something. Yesterday wasn't a fluke. You have natural abilities that the Army values highly. More importantly, you have the character to use those abilities in service of others. As I drove home through the Colorado afternoon, my mind raced with possibilities I'd never imagined. Officer training, a steady paycheck, respect instead of disappointment, a chance to do something that mattered. But first, I had to face my mother. The house felt different when I walked through the front door. Maybe it was me who had changed, carrying the weight of General Nakamura's offer, and the knowledge that I might actually have value in this world. My mother was in her usual spot on the couch, still in her hospital scrubs from the night shift. You were gone early, she said without looking up from her phone. Another job interview that won't go anywhere? Something like that. I sat down across from her, studying her tired face. Carmen Martinez at 53 looked older than her years. Gray streaks had taken over her black hair, and the lines around her eyes spoke of decades of worry and disappointment. Mom, what if I told you the Army wants to make me an officer? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Rebecca, please, don't start with fantasies now. We have real problems to deal with. I got the electric bill today. It's past due again. I'm serious. They want me to join as a second lieutenant. This time she looked at me, and I saw something flicker in her expression. Not belief exactly, but curiosity about why I was spinning such an elaborate lie. The Army doesn't make people officers without college degrees, Rebecca, even though I know that. I pulled out Colonel Harper's business card and the packet of information Captain Wright had given me. They have a direct commission program for people with specialized skills. My mother took the papers, her expression shifting as she read. The official letterhead, the formal language, the detailed explanation of the civil affairs position. It was all real and official in a way that my previous job prospects had never been. What specialized skills? She asked, her voice smaller now. So I told her. About Lieutenant Torres and the rescue. About the other soldiers I'd helped over the past months. About General Nakamura's investigation and their assessment of my natural abilities. My mother listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. You never told me about helping all these people, she said when I finished. Would you have cared? The question hung in the air between us. My mother set down the Army papers and rubbed her temples. Rebecca, do you think I wanted to be disappointed in you? Do you think I enjoyed watching my daughter struggle? It felt like you enjoyed reminding me about it. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, softer, more vulnerable than I'd heard in years. When your father left, you were only 8 years old. Miguel was already showing signs of being responsible, but you were still so young. I was working 60 hours a week just to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. I couldn't be there for school events or help with homework or even take you to the park most weekends. I'd never heard this version of the story before. My mother rarely talked about the time after my father abandoned us. I kept thinking that if I could just push you hard enough, you'd develop the same drive that kept me going. The same determination that got me through nursing school while raising 2 kids alone. But every time you quit something or lost a job, it felt like proof that I'd failed as a mother. So you decided I was a failure instead? I decided you were wasting your potential. There's a difference, even if it didn't feel like one. She picked up the army documents again, reading more carefully this time. Tell me about this girl you saved, this Lieutenant Torres. I described the rescue in detail, the technical aspects of treating her injuries, the logistics of the evacuation, the split-second decisions that had to be made with incomplete information. As I talked, I watched my mother's expression change. You did all that without any medical training? I had basic first aid certification. The rest was just instinct, I guess. Instinct, she repeated the word thoughtfully. Rebecca, why didn't you tell me you were helping people in the mountains? It was a fair question, and the answer revealed more about our relationship than I was comfortable acknowledging. Because you would have found a way to make it about what I was doing wrong. You'd have said I was wasting time that should be spent job hunting, or putting myself in danger unnecessarily, or playing hero instead of being responsible. My mother flinched. Is that really how you see me? Mom, 3 days ago you called me a burden and told me to move out. What was I supposed to think? She set the papers down and looked at me directly for the first time in months. Really looked at me, not through the lens of disappointment or frustration that had colored our interactions for years. Show me your hiking gear, she said suddenly. What? Your backpack, the supplies you carry. Show me. Confused, I went to my room and returned with my hiking pack. I emptied it onto the coffee table. First aid supplies, emergency blankets, water purification tablets, rope, carabiners, a GPS device, protein bars, extra batteries, even a small camp stove. My mother examined each item carefully. How much does all this cost? I don't know, I bought it piece by piece over the last 2 years. She picked up the GPS device, turning it over in her hands. This alone is $300. The first aid supplies, the rope, the emergency gear. Rebecca, you've built a professional-grade rescue kit. I just wanted to be prepared. For what? For when someone needed help. The silence that followed felt different from our usual uncomfortable pauses. This one was thoughtful, contemplative. You know, my mother said slowly, when I was studying to be a nurse, my instructors used to talk about people who had the calling. Not everyone who goes into healthcare has it. Some people are just there for job security or the steady paycheck. But some people, they have this instinct to help, to heal, to put themselves at risk for strangers. She picked up the army paperwork again. I think I've been looking at you wrong all these years. What do you mean? I kept trying to force you into boxes that didn't fit. College, traditional jobs, conventional success. But maybe your path was always going to be different. I felt something crack open in my chest. A door I'd kept locked for so long I'd forgotten it existed. Are you saying you support this, the army offer? I'm saying that for the first time in years I'm proud of my daughter, not because of what you might become, but because of who you already are. The words hit me harder than any criticism she'd ever delivered. I felt tears threatening and fought them back. Mom, I don't know if I can do it. Officer training, leading people, living up to their expectations. What if I fail again? Rebecca, you organized a medical evacuation through 4 miles of mountain terrain and saved a woman's life. You've been quietly helping people for months without asking for anything in return. You built a professional rescue kit with money you could barely afford because you wanted to be ready when someone needed help. She reached over and took my hand, something she hadn't done since I was a child. Mija, you're not failing at life. You've been succeeding at something the rest of us were too blind to see. Outside, a car door slammed. We both looked toward the front window, and my blood ran cold. A black sedan was parked in our driveway, and a man in military dress uniform was walking toward our door. The doorbell rang with the measured precision of someone accustomed to military punctuality. My mother and I exchanged glances, both of us frozen in the moment of our breakthrough conversation. "Are you expecting someone from the army?" she whispered. "No. They said I had a week to decide." The bell rang again. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and walked to the front door. Through the peephole, I could see the man more clearly, an older officer with silver hair and enough ribbons on his chest to outfit a small parade. This wasn't Colonel Harper or anyone I'd met at Fort Carson. I opened the door to find myself face to face with a 3-star general whose presence seemed to command respect from the very air around him. "Miss Rebecca Martinez?" His voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades leading troops into battle. "Yes, sir. I'm General Thomas Blackwood, United States Army Special Operations Command. May I come in? I have something important to discuss with you and your family." My mother appeared beside me, still holding the Fort Carson paperwork. General Blackwood's eyes took in the documents in her hands, and something like approval flickered across his face. "Mrs. Martinez, I presume? I'm here about your daughter." We led him to the living room, where my hiking gear was still spread across the coffee table. General Blackwood studied the equipment with professional interest before taking a seat. "Ms. Martinez, 3 days ago you saved the life of Lieutenant Sarah Torres. What you don't know is that Lieutenant Torres is one of our most valuable intelligence officers, recently returned from a classified operation in Afghanistan." I felt the blood drain from my face. "I don't understand." Torres was scheduled to brief the Pentagon next week on critical intelligence gathered during her deployment. Her death would have been a significant loss to national security. More importantly to me, she would have left behind a husband and 2 young children. General Blackwood reached into his briefcase and pulled out a metal case and a formal document. "But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because of what happened after you saved Lieutenant Torres." My mother leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "Mrs. Martinez, your daughter's actions on that mountain weren't just heroic. They were strategic. She assessed a complex situation, organized resources, delegated tasks to trained soldiers, and executed a flawless evacuation under extreme pressure. These are the qualities we look for in our most elite special operations officers." He opened the metal case, revealing a bronze star nestled in blue velvet. "However, there's more to the story. After Lieutenant Torres was transported to Denver Presbyterian, she was debriefed by our intelligence officers. During that conversation, she mentioned something interesting about her rescuer." General Blackwood pulled out a photograph, a surveillance image of me helping the college students during the snowstorm on Mount Elbert months earlier. This photograph was taken by a drone during a training exercise last February. We had a Special Forces team conducting cold weather survival training in the area when they observed a civilian conducting what appeared to be a professional mountain rescue operation. My heart started racing. "You were watching me?" "Not intentionally. But when Torres mentioned her rescuer's name, our intelligence analysts cross-referenced it with other incidents in the Colorado backcountry. What they found was remarkable." He spread out several more photographs and documents on the coffee table, images and reports I'd never seen before. "Over the past 18 months, you've been involved in 17 separate rescue or assistance operations in the Colorado mountains. 11 of those involved military personnel, though you weren't aware of their service at the time. The other 6 involved civilians who later reported their experiences to local authorities." My mother stared at the documents. 17? "Rebecca, you never told me." "I didn't think it was important," I said weakly. General Blackwood continued. "What makes this significant is the pattern of your interventions. You consistently identified potential problems before they became life-threatening emergencies. You carried equipment specifically designed for the types of emergencies you encountered. And most importantly, you never sought recognition or compensation for your actions." He pointed to one of the reports. "Sergeant Kevin Morrison, lost in a blizzard on Mount Massive. You found him using GPS coordinates you calculated based on his intended route and weather patterns. That's not luck, Ms. Martinez. That's tactical thinking." Another document. Specialist Maria Santos, hypothermic after falling through ice. You had dry clothes in her size, chemical hand warmers, and a thermal blanket. You were prepared for that specific emergency. I just carry extra gear in case someone needs it, I protested. Ms. Martinez, professional search and rescue teams don't carry the range of emergency equipment you routinely pack for day hikes. You've essentially been operating as a one-person disaster response unit in the Colorado backcountry. General Blackwood stood and faced my mother directly. Mrs. Martinez, I'm here to tell you that your daughter has been quietly saving lives for over a year. Not just Lieutenant Torres. 17 different people owe their lives or their safety to Rebecca's intervention. She's been performing at the level of our most elite operators without any formal training. My mother's eyes filled with tears. I had no idea. I thought she was just wandering around the mountains. She was, and while she was wandering, she was developing skills that our Special Operations Command spends millions of dollars trying to teach: natural situational awareness, tactical problem solving, selfless commitment to helping others, and the physical conditioning to operate effectively in extreme environments. He turned back to me. Ms. Martinez, Colonel Harper offered you a commission as a second lieutenant in civil affairs. I'm here to make a different offer. General Blackwood opened his briefcase again and pulled out another set of documents. I want you to consider joining the 75th Ranger Regiment as a search and rescue specialist. You would enter as a second lieutenant, but after completing Ranger School and specialized training, you'd be leading mountain rescue operations for Special Operations Forces worldwide. The room spun around me. Rangers, I'd heard of them, elite soldiers who operated in the most dangerous places on Earth. Sir, I don't think I'm Ranger material. I can't even do a proper push-up. General Blackwood smiled for the first time since arriving. Ms. Martinez, physical fitness can be trained. What you have: the instinct to help others, the ability to think clearly under pressure, the natural tactical awareness. These things can't be taught. They're either in your DNA or they're not. He handed me the documents. This is a direct commission into the Rangers. Contingent on completing officer candidate school and Ranger training. Full military benefits, immediate rank of second lieutenant, and assignment to the most elite rescue unit in the U.S. military. My mother spoke up, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. What exactly would she be doing? Saving lives, Mrs. Martinez. Just like she's been doing in Colorado, but with the full support and resources of the United States Army behind her. I looked at my mother, seeing pride in her eyes for the first time since childhood. Then I looked at General Blackwood, this 3-star general who had driven to my mother's duplex to personally recruit someone who'd been called a burden just 3 days earlier. General, I need to ask you something, I said. Why me? Why not recruit someone who's already proven themselves in the military? Because, Ms. Martinez, we have plenty of soldiers who can follow orders and execute missions. What we don't have enough of are people who see a problem and solve it without being told to. People who prepare for emergencies that might never happen because they can't bear the thought of someone suffering when help is available. He gestured to my hiking gear spread across the coffee table. You built this rescue kit and carried it into the mountains every weekend for over a year, not because someone ordered you to, but because you couldn't live with yourself if you encountered someone in need and weren't prepared to help. That's the kind of person we need leading our most critical operations. I looked at the metal case, still open on the table. The bronze star gleamed in the afternoon light filtering through our living room windows. What's the medal for? I asked. It's for Lieutenant Torres, General Blackwood said, but she asked me to present it to the person who saved her life. She said she couldn't accept recognition for surviving when someone else deserved recognition for the courage to act. He closed the metal case and handed it to me. This is yours, Ms. Martinez. Whether you join the Rangers or not, you've earned it. As I held the metal case, feeling its weight in my hands, I realized that everything in my life had led to this moment. Every failed job, every disappointed look from my mother, every weekend spent alone in the mountains. It had all been preparation for something I never could have imagined. General, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, when do I start? The next 6 months transformed my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. Officer Candidate School at Fort Moore, Georgia, was designed to break people down and rebuild them as leaders. For someone who'd been called a burden and couldn't hold a civilian job, the physical and mental challenges should have been overwhelming. Instead, I thrived. The obstacle courses that left other candidates gasping reminded me of navigating Rocky Mountain terrain. The land navigation exercises using map and compass felt like weekend hikes in familiar territory. When our drill sergeant, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, screamed at us during stress training, I thought about Lieutenant Torres bleeding on those rocks and how much worse real emergencies could be. "Martinez," he'd bellow during dawn PT, "you think this is a nature walk?" "No, drill sergeant," I'd respond, cranking out push-ups that 6 months earlier I couldn't do. But it was during the leadership exercises that something clicked. When our class was divided into teams for complex problem-solving scenarios, I found myself naturally taking charge. Not because I was the loudest or most aggressive, but because I could see solutions others missed. During one exercise, our team was tasked with evacuating wounded soldiers across a simulated river using limited equipment. While other groups argued about who should be in charge, I was already assessing the terrain, calculating load distributions, and organizing personnel based on their individual strengths. "Candidate Williams, you're our strongest swimmer. You'll secure the far anchor point. Candidate Chen, your engineering background makes you perfect for rigging the pulley system. Johnson, your medical training means you handle casualty assessment and stabilization." We completed the exercise in half the time of the next fastest team. Captain Sarah Mitchell, our class tactical officer, pulled me aside afterward. "Martinez, where did you learn tactical personnel management?" "I didn't learn it anywhere, ma'am. It just makes sense." She made a note in her ever-present clipboard. "General Blackwood mentioned you had natural instincts. I'm beginning to understand what he meant." The academic portions of OCS challenged me differently. Military history, leadership theory, tactical planning, subjects I'd never studied, but found myself absorbing with an intensity that surprised my instructors. For the first time in my educational life, I wasn't just memorizing information to pass tests. I was learning skills that would keep people alive. My mother called every Sunday, and the conversations were unlike any we'd had in years. "How are you handling the physical training?" she asked during week 8. "Better than I expected. Yesterday I did 50 push-ups without stopping." 50? "Rebecca, a year ago you couldn't open pickle jars." Turns out I was stronger than either of us thought. There was a pause on the line. "I'm proud of you, Misha." I should have said that more often when you were growing up. "Mom, you were working 3 jobs to keep us fed. You did the best you could." Still, I should have seen what you were capable of, instead of focusing on what you weren't accomplishing. These conversations became the highlight of my weeks. My mother had started telling people about my military service, something that shocked me until I realized how much pride she'd been carrying in silence. Graduation from OCS was surreal. Standing in formation as families watched from the bleachers, I spotted my mother in the 3rd row. She was wearing her best dress and crying openly as I received my commission as Second Lieutenant Rebecca Martinez, United States Army. But officer candidate school was just the beginning. Ranger School was where the real test began. Fort Moore's Ranger Training Brigade had a reputation for breaking soldiers who thought they were tough. The failure rate hovered around 60%, and those who graduated earned the right to wear the Ranger tab, one of the most respected insignia in the military. I was one of only 3 women in my class of 48 candidates, and the instructors made it clear they expected most of us to quit within the first week. Staff Sergeant James Murphy, a veteran of multiple deployments with the 75th Ranger Regiment, addressed our class on day 1.
"Look around you. 48 soldiers think they have what it takes to be Rangers. Statistically, fewer than 20 of you will graduate. The mountains of Georgia don't care about your feelings. The swamps of Florida don't care about your personal problems. And enemy forces sure as hell won't give you a participation trophy." The first phase, conducted in the mountains of northern Georgia, was designed to test our ability to operate under extreme stress with minimal food and sleep. We carried 70-pound rucksacks through terrain that made my Colorado hiking look like casual strolls. But something unexpected happened during those grueling weeks. While other candidates struggled with the mountainous environment, I found myself helping them navigate challenging terrain. My natural understanding of elevation changes, weather patterns, and route selection became assets, not just for me, but for my entire squad. During one particularly difficult patrol, Candidate Jackson, a tank officer from Texas, was struggling with altitude sickness and disorientation. "Martinez," he whispered during a brief halt, "I can't tell which direction we're supposed to be moving. Everything looks the same." I glanced at our map, assessed the terrain features around us, and pointed toward a ridgeline barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness. "See that saddle between the two peaks? We need to be on the north side of it by sunrise. The trail curves left about 300 meters ahead." "How can you tell?" "The way the shadows fall, the vegetation patterns, the sound of water. There's a creek running parallel to our route." Jackson made it through that patrol, and word spread quickly through the class that Martinez could read terrain like others read books. The instructors took notice. "Candidate Martinez," Sergeant First Class Williams called me aside after a navigation exercise where I'd led my team to the objective faster than any other group. "Your file says you have no formal military training before OCS. Where did you learn fieldcraft?" "Hiking in Colorado, Sergeant. Just paying attention to my surroundings." "Just paying attention." He shook his head. "Candidate, I've been training Rangers for 12 years. What you call just paying attention is what we call advanced tactical awareness. Most soldiers take years to develop that level of environmental consciousness." The Florida phase tested our ability to operate in swamps and wetlands, environments completely different from my mountain experience. Here, I struggled initially, but I applied the same principles I learned in Colorado: observe, adapt, and always be prepared for changing conditions. During a particularly challenging swamp patrol, our squad became disoriented in thick vegetation with limited visibility. Candidate Rodriguez, our squad leader, was clearly lost but too proud to admit it. "Martinez," he whispered during a brief halt, "can you get us to the next checkpoint?" I'd been tracking our movement using a combination of compass bearings, time estimates, and terrain features. Even in the swamp, there were signs: the flow of water, the density of vegetation, the direction of prevailing winds. We reached the objective with 10 minutes to spare, and Rodriguez recommended me for a leadership position in the next phase. The mountain phase in Utah was where everything came together. Operating at high altitude with minimal equipment, conducting long-range reconnaissance patrols, and executing complex tactical scenarios. It was everything I'd been unconsciously preparing for during those weekend hikes in Colorado. But it was during the final field exercise that I truly understood why General Blackwood had recruited me. Our mission was to infiltrate enemy territory, conduct reconnaissance on a high-value target, and extract through mountainous terrain while avoiding pursuit. Real Rangers played the role of enemy forces, and they knew the area far better than we did. 2 days into the exercise, Candidate Thompson suffered a severe ankle injury during a night movement. He couldn't walk, let alone complete the mission. Standard protocol would be to call for medical evacuation and accept a failed mission. Instead, I improvised an evacuation plan. Using rope and equipment we carried for other purposes, I rigged a one-person drag stretcher that would allow us to move Thompson across rough terrain. I calculated a route that avoided the most difficult obstacles while still reaching our objective. And I organized the squad into rotating teams that could maintain our mission timeline while caring for our injured teammate. We completed the reconnaissance, extracted Thompson safely, and reached our final objective ahead of schedule. Sergeant Major Patricia Walsh, the senior ranger instructor, was waiting at the extraction point. "Candidate Martinez, explain to me how your squad managed to complete a complex mission while conducting a medical evacuation with no additional resources." "Sergeant Major, we adapted our tactics to meet changing circumstances while maintaining focus on the primary objective." She studied me for a long moment. "Candidate, in my 23 years of training Rangers, I've never seen a more textbook example of mission-first, people-always leadership. You found a way to accomplish the mission without abandoning your teammate." 3 weeks later, I stood with 19 other survivors as we received our Ranger tabs. My mother was there again, along with General Blackwood and several officers from Special Operations Command. But the biggest surprise came from Lieutenant Sarah Torres, now fully recovered and wearing the rank of captain. She approached me after the ceremony. "Second Lieutenant Martinez, ready to save some more lives?" "Always, ma'am." "Good, because your first assignment is with my unit. We will deploy to Afghanistan in 3 months, and we need someone who can bring people home safe." As I pinned the Ranger tab to my uniform, I thought about the woman who'd been called a burden just 8 months earlier. That person felt like a stranger now, someone I'd once been but could barely remember. I was Second Lieutenant Rebecca Martinez, United States Army Rangers, and I was just getting started. 2 years after earning my Ranger tab, I found myself standing in the Rose Garden of the White House, wearing my dress blues and trying not to fidget as President Harrison prepared to speak. My mother sat in the front row of guests, tears streaming down her face as she clutched the invitation that had arrived 3 weeks earlier. The ceremony was for recipients of the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the United States. I still couldn't believe my name was on the list. "Ladies and gentlemen," President Harrison began, "today we honor 5 Americans whose extraordinary courage in the face of overwhelming odds exemplify the finest traditions of military service. The story that brought me here began 6 months ago in the mountains of Pakistan during what was supposed to be a routine extraction mission. Intelligence reports indicated a downed helicopter with 4 survivors in Taliban-controlled territory. What they didn't mention was the blizzard that grounded all aircraft for 3 days and 100 enemy fighters converging on the crash site. My team, now expanded to 8 Rangers, had volunteered for the overland rescue mission. Command considered it a suicide run, but we were the only unit with mountain warfare experience in the region. The crash site is here, Captain Torres had briefed us, pointing to a map location that made my stomach drop. 70 miles through hostile territory, elevation changes of over 8,000 feet, and enemy forces control every major route. I studied the terrain data for hours, identifying a path that avoided major population centers and Taliban strongholds. It meant traveling through some of the most treacherous mountain passes in the Hindu Kush, but it was our only chance. The mission began at midnight on a moonless night. We carried everything we needed for 5 days of mountain travel: climbing gear, medical supplies, cold weather equipment, and enough ammunition for a small war. Each ranger carried over 90 pounds of equipment through terrain that would challenge experienced mountaineers under normal circumstances.
On day 2, we encountered our first major obstacle. A Taliban patrol had set up a checkpoint on the only bridge across a raging river. Going around meant adding 20 miles to our route, time the helicopter survivors didn't have. We go through them, I decided during our planning session. Fast, quiet, and gone before they know what hit them. Sergeant Foster, our newest team member, looked skeptical. "Ma'am, that's 15 Taliban fighters in defensive positions. We're outnumbered 2 to 1. Numbers don't matter if they never see us coming." We struck at dawn, using the terrain to our advantage. While half the team created a distraction downstream, the other half crossed the river using climbing techniques and eliminated the checkpoint guards silently. The entire operation took 12 minutes. But the real test came on day 3, when we reached the crash site. The helicopter had gone down in a narrow valley surrounded by peaks. Taliban forces had the area surrounded, and they were closing in on the 4 survivors who had taken shelter in a cave system. Among the survivors was Colonel Michael O'Brien, a high-ranking intelligence officer whose capture would have been a catastrophic security breach. "Martinez," Colonel O'Brien said when we reached their position. "Thank God. How many soldiers did they send for this rescue?" 8, sir. My team." His face went pale. 8? There are over 100 enemy fighters out there. "Yes, sir. That's why we need to move now." The extraction plan required everything I'd learned about mountain warfare. We rigged zip lines across the valley to avoid Taliban positions on the ground. Using smoke grenades and carefully timed explosions, we created confusion while moving the survivors in small groups. But halfway through the extraction, everything went wrong.
Taliban reinforcements arrived with heavy weapons, cutting off our planned escape route. Sergeant Kim took shrapnel in the leg during the first mortar barrage. Corporal Morrison was pinned down by sniper fire. The survivors, exhausted and suffering from exposure, could barely move. That's when I made the decision that would bring me to the White House. Foster, take Kim and 3 survivors up the North Ridge. Gonzalez, you and Thompson get Morrison and extract to the south. I'll hold this position until everyone's clear. Ma'am, that's suicide, Foster protested. You can't hold off 100 Taliban by yourself. I won't be by myself. Colonel O'Brien is staying with me. For the next 40 minutes, Colonel O'Brien and I held off advancing Taliban forces using every defensive technique I'd learned, and several I improvised on the spot. We used the rocky terrain to create choke points, forcing the enemy to advance through narrow passages where their numbers didn't matter. When my ammunition ran low, I switched to the enemy weapons we'd captured. When those ran out, I used improvised explosives from equipment in my pack. The mountain warfare training that had started with weekend hikes in Colorado now meant the difference between life and death for 8 American soldiers. The rescue helicopters finally arrived just as our position was being overrun. As we lifted off, I could see Taliban fighters flooding into the valley below. Another 5 minutes, and we would have been captured or killed. Now, standing in the Rose Garden, President Harrison read the citation that still seemed surreal. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of her life above and beyond the call of duty, Second Lieutenant Rebecca Martinez distinguished herself during combat operations against an armed enemy. When he placed the Medal of Honor around my neck, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from a woman called a burden to the highest military honor in America, from unemployed and living with my mother to standing beside the President of the United States. After the ceremony, my mother approached General Blackwood, who had become something of a mentor over the past 3 years. Rebecca, my mother said, her voice thick with emotion, I have something to tell you. I've been saving newspaper clippings about your military service. Every article, every mention of your missions. I have a whole scrapbook. Mom, you don't need to. Yes, I do. Because for years I told you were wasting your potential. I was wrong. You weren't wasting anything. You were preparing for this moment, for this calling in ways none of us could understand. General Blackwood smiled. Mrs. Martinez, your daughter has revolutionized how the military conducts high-risk rescues. The techniques she developed are now taught at the Special Operations School. She saved 43 lives in direct action missions. 43 people. My little girl who used to get lost in shopping malls has saved 43 lives? As we stood together on the White House lawn, I realized that my story wasn't really about military heroism or medals or recognition. It was about finding your purpose, even when everyone around you thinks you're lost. The woman who had been called a burden had become someone who carried others to safety. And somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Colorado, there are people alive today because I'd finally discovered who I was meant to be.
Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.